My name is Nancy Barnes, and I would like to welcome you to PlusHR webinar. This webinar is intended to provide practical assistance and support in understanding what are HR policies and procedures, specifically looking at some of the key policies that employers should have. PlusHR are based in central London and are a team of friendly, CIPD-qualified HR experts who specialise in providing practical HR and recruitment support to UK businesses. We offer a range of services that help businesses of all sizes handle their HR, recruit top talent, and develop their team. Businesses should not leave it up to common sense or past experience to expect their staff to understand what the policies and procedures are within your business. Therefore, ensuring you have some will be beneficial in helping you let someone know when they have overstepped those boundaries or what your expectations are. Therefore, a policy needs to be a clear, simple statement of your organisation's objectives and expectations in certain employment matters and ensures that everyone is going in the same direction. Policies don't need to be long or complicated. A couple of sentences may be all you need for each policy area. A procedure describes how a policy will be put into action in your organisation. Each procedure should have who will do what and the steps they need to take. This document is more prescriptive by nature, but not necessarily long, because there is nothing more off-putting than presenting a policy which resembles an encyclopedia. What tends to end up happening with these types of policies is that no one ever reads them, or they get lost from the translation to application stage. So keep them succinct, on point, and up to date. There is no point having a policy which tells your staff to speak with someone about their concerns if the individual is no longer there. Remember that policies and procedures are specific to an organisation and its culture, but they share the same role in guiding your organisation. They can be in contracts, handbooks, agreements, and memos, or simply pinned above the coffee machine. So, in the very minimum, you should have a health and safety policy. If you are wondering which policies a business should have as a minimum, then you need look no further than these top 4. A health and safety policy is a must-have, and if you need help in developing one or checking your current one, then it is advisable to visit the Health and Safety Executive website. Coming in at number 2 is a disciplinary policy. This is especially important if there are specific industry rules that you need to communicate, such as no blasphemy in the workplace. A grievance policy should also be in the top 4 must-have policies to have. A grievance policy is a formal policy which informs the employee to whom they must communicate their concerns about the business or a colleague. Finally, including a dignity at work policy is important because it is a statement about bullying, harassment, and victimization in the workplace. The policy should have a short definition on what these mean and be clear in how it is managed and to whom the employee should raise such concerns with. When drafting a policy, it is important to remember the purpose and audience. It is important to understand what it is you are trying to manage, and don't get too hung up on the procedure at this point, but instead focus on what it is you are setting the groundwork for. In an absence policy, one of the most basic questions you should be setting the groundwork for is if the company will be paying for absences, and if so, for what type and for how long. If you do pay, it is best to be clear about the framework under which payment will or will not be paid. In looking at an annual leave policy, You may wish to address the company's position in terms of unpaid holiday leave and the ability to buy additional holiday. For some businesses, this is where they can be different and be more competitive. Your audience is also important because you may have to consider a variety of policies to meet the needs of each site if you are a multi-site business. In some industries, it is common to have 2 policies, each addressing different levels of staff, such as in schools. It should also be stressed that a policy can be read as the culture of an organisation. The more draconian the policy, the more autocratic the culture. Earlier, I mentioned that 2 key policies to have are the disciplinary and grievance policies. This is because having a policy encourages employees to achieve and maintain standards of behaviour and performance, and to ensure that disciplinary offences are dealt with fairly and consistently. It is also vital that having a grievance policy allows for employees' problems or concerns to be dealt with fairly and speedily before they develop into major problems and potentially a collective dispute. If a dispute between the employer and employee does ensue, the courts will tend to listen to how the dispute should have been resolved in the first instance. These guidelines are published by an independent organisation called ACAS, which stands for the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service. They are seen to be the leading authority on how workplace problems should be managed. They are important and the courts listen to them and how they would expect a reasonable person to manage workplace conflicts. Another popular policy is the capability policy. The driver behind this policy is primarily the steps the business will take to manage poor performers. It provides a consistent and systematic approach across a business in explaining the process by which it will take to change the behaviour of an individual in order to meet the standards required. However, like with all policies, this type of policy is best suited for large organisations, as it requires plenty of micromanagement and support. In a smaller business, dealing with poor performers may require more flexibility, which a capability policy may not be able to provide. It is also useful to consider including some family policies, most of which, although statutory, can also be used to set the tone and culture of a business and, perhaps, allow the opportunity for businesses to be different. If you are considering including a family section, the type of policies one would expect to see would be information about maternity, paternity, and parental types of leave. Personally, after many years of working with businesses that have excluded them, I really don't see the point of hiding someone's statutory rights. In fact, it is best for you as their employer to explain what their rights are, which avoids having someone else tell your employee what they think they are entitled to. Also, with the recent changes in government, we are waiting for more details after it was announced this year that they were looking at allowing parents to transfer part of their family-friendly leave to grandparents. A dress code is another policy which is useful, especially if you have to meet a specific regulatory requirement. Such a policy needs to identify what it is you are trying to achieve and be fair to both females and males insofar as you can. So, applying a policy of women having to wear skirts is not appropriate unless justifiable. Who justifies this, I hear you ask? Well, eventually, it will be down to a judge in the tribunal. Procedures describe how each policy will be put into action in your organisation. Each procedure should have who will do what steps they need to take, or which forms or documents to use. Procedures might just be a few bullet points or instructions. Sometimes they work well as forms, checklists, instructions, or flowcharts. Procedures should be simple. Remember to check it against other procedures so there are no inconsistencies. There is nothing worse than asking your staff to call a person who no longer works for the company on the first day of an absence. My tip is to always get a second pair of eyes to it. Procedures will vary between workplaces because they reflect the values, approaches, and commitments of a specific organisation and its culture. But they share the same role in guiding your organisation. Procedures should be easy for an employee to locate and normally share the same space and page as the relevant policy. In looking at a disciplinary procedure, it is important that the employee has the right to be informed of the case against them, the allegations and evidence, the right to make representations before a decision is made, challenging the evidence, the right to be advised in writing, the right to an unbiased hearing, the right of appeal, the right to be represented throughout the whole procedure. These rights are what we term as the principles of natural justice. Natural justice is about being fair and reasonable, so it is vital that you consider training your line managers in managing disciplinaries. Likewise, a grievance procedure should identify the person to whom the concerns should be sent to, incorporate the dignity at work policy, must be taken seriously by the employer, must be kept confidential. Individuals have the right to be accompanied by a work colleague or an accredited trade union representative. It should be simple and conducted by an individual who has been trained in identifying and managing all grievances. So, in concluding this webinar, we hopefully have been able to identify what is a policy and what is a procedure, and what you should have as the bare minimum, which are a health and safety policy, a disciplinary and grievance policy, and a dignity at work policy. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We hope you found this useful.